It started on a night when the snow fell thick as wool over County Memorial Hospital, smothering every sound and turning the world white and silent. In the fluorescent-lit corridors, the air felt brittle and sharp. People who'd worked here long enough, orderlies, nurses, even the oldest night guard, learned to give one room a wide berth, always. Room 214, the place you didn't volunteer to cover on the schedule. Not if you believed in luck or in stories that refused to die. Tonight, room 214 flickered like a failing star. The power in that part of the building always danced on a knife's edge, lights blinking, monitors hiccuping, strange shadows forming in corners you could almost ignore if you tried hard enough. Jack Green sat in a cracked vinyl chair next to the bed, elbows on his knees, hands tangled together like he was praying for a second chance. He was a tall man, a little bent around the edges, used to laughter, but now grown hollow and quiet. His hair was a mess, salt and pepper and wild, and the last few nights had carved deep grooves into his face. Jack's world had shrunk to this room, into the small, unmoving body on the hospital bed. His daughter, Ellie, 7 years old, red curls tangled on the pillow, skin too pale against the blue sheets. Machines whispered and beeped at her side, every sound carving through Jack's chest. She hadn't spoken or moved in days. The doctors called it a coma, as if the word could tidy away the terror that grew in Jack every minute Ellie didn't wake up. The staff avoided 214 when they could. People whispered about the room that drains people. Nurses traded stories over cold coffee, how patients here never quite left or left too soon. No one could explain the sudden chills, the equipment that blinked out for no reason, or why the flowers wilted faster here than anywhere else. Jack hadn't cared about rumors until he started noticing things himself. The room never warmed up, no matter how high he cranked the radiator. Every night at exactly 2:14 a.m., the overhead lights would stutter and die for a heartbeat. Ellie's monitors would surge and then drop to a hush, like the room itself was holding its breath. But tonight, as the storm pressed against the windows, Jack stared at his daughter and tried to remember her voice. The way she used to burst through the kitchen door after school, mud on her shoes, and a grin so fierce it almost hurt to see. He remembered chasing her through the backyard, her giggle trailing behind, her favorite blue backpack bouncing on her shoulders. All of that felt distant now, like a life borrowed from someone else. He heard footsteps in the hallway, a nurse coming to check Ellie's vitals. The nurse's name was Cynthia, middle-aged, always humming under her breath, eyes sharp with worry. She lingered at the doorway, not stepping inside. "Any change?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jack shook his head. She checked the monitors, adjusted the IV. "These rooms, they're not like the others," she said quietly. "You feel it, don't you?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in places that held on to sadness, places that collected fear like dust in the corners. He wanted to get Ellie out of here, but there was nowhere else to go. After Cynthia left, Jack sat in silence. His hand wrapped around Ellie's small fingers. Her skin was cold. Outside, the wind howled. Somewhere down the hallway, a janitor's mop bucket clattered. Everything else was still. The hospital at night was a kingdom of secrets where people slipped between dreams and nightmares and sometimes never came back. Jack drifted, half asleep, half alert. He remembered the last thing Ellie said before the fever. "Daddy, are monsters real?" He laughed then, hugged her, said, "Not in this house, sweetheart. Not ever?" Now, he wasn't so sure. He snapped awake when he felt a sudden drop in the air, as if someone had opened a freezer door. His breath clouded and the lights flickered so violently, he thought the bulbs might shatter. That's when Jack noticed something odd, a sound almost too soft to hear, nails clicking on tile. He squinted at the doorway, convinced he saw movement, a shadow slipping in from the hall. For a moment, he thought he was imagining it, a trick of exhaustion and fear. But then he saw it clearly. A black and white German shepherd, big as life, with a coat that shimmered silver under the harsh lights. The dog stood in the doorway, head high, eyes dark and ancient. It looked straight at Jack, then padded across the floor without hesitation. Jack blinked, but the dog didn't vanish, didn't hesitate. It walked right up to Ellie's bed and with the gentlest motion settled at her feet. The monitors paused, the machine stilled. Jack's heart stopped too, just for a moment. He tried to stand, to say something, but the words dried up. He wasn't sure if he was dreaming or if the room had shifted into some new reality where nothing made sense. The dog looked at Jack, and Jack felt a jolt of something he couldn't name. Comfort and fear tangled together. For the first time in days, the weight in his chest lifted, just a little. He sat back, staring at the animal lying so calmly beside his daughter, as if it belonged here all along. The fluorescent lights stopped flickering. The cold faded. For a heartbeat, room 214 felt safe, like the eye of the storm. Jack leaned forward and whispered, "Who are you?" But the only answer was the sound of his daughter's breathing, steady even. For the first time in days, he didn't know it yet, but nothing about a room 214 would ever be the same again. Snow drifted against the glass as midnight deepened. Every other door along the long corridor was closed tight, lights humming with the lazy patience of the graveyard shift. But room 214, for the first time since Ellie slipped into silence, felt different and warmer. Or maybe it was just Jack's own heart, confused by the impossible. This German shepherd curled up at the foot of Ellie's Torres, paws crossed, chest rising and falling in a slow, protective rhythm. Jack couldn't sleep. He watched the dog, half expecting it to evaporate in the next blink. Instead, the animal lifted its head, ears flicking, eyes calm and fathomless. The hospital for a moment felt like a sanctuary, a pause in the storm of grief. But Jack wasn't the only one who noticed something off that night. Downstairs in the security office, a young man named Luis was eating a microwaved burrito, scrolling through the night's footage. The camera feeds flickered in and out, but nothing unusual, until he rewound the tape by the emergency entrance. At 11:42 p.m., a patch of static bloomed and a black and white shape ghosted into the frame. Luis leaned forward, squinting as the feed glitched, pixelated. The back door was unlatched. The German shepherd appeared, as if conjured by the snow, nose to the ground, tail low, but steady. Luis frowned. Nobody had come in. No staff badge swiped, no visitor log signed. He clicked through to the hallway cameras. The animal strolled by, utterly unfazed by the world around it. No one looked up. Not a single nurse, not a single patient seemed to see the dog at all. Luis shivered, then grabbed his radio. This is Luis. Security, calling the second floor. Do we have a K9 in the building? His voice crackled in the empty channel. Only silence. On the second floor, Nurse Cynthia made her rounds. She paused outside 200 and we're 14, hesitation, drawing her hand back from the doorknob. She glanced through the window. A German shepherd, regal and perfectly still, was pressed up against Ellie's feet. For a split second, Cynthia saw a shimmer around the dog, almost like a halo, something more felt than seen. She pushed the door open slowly. The dog looked up at her, meeting her gaze, but didn't move. It didn't bark, didn't show its teeth. But there was a low rumble, not angry, just a warning, old and deep. Cynthia's hand froze. Her mind scrambled for protocol. Call animal control? Alert security? But she remembered every whisper about this room, every nurse who'd found an excuse to switch shifts. Jack, do you know this dog? She asked quietly. Jack shook his head, voice husky. No, but he's not hurting anyone. Cynthia hesitated, then took a step back. She watched the monitors. For the first time in days, Ellie's heart rate was steady, the lines no longer jagged with anxiety. Jack, feeling suddenly brave, reached out to rest his hand near the dog's head. The shepherd's ears flicked, but he allowed the touch. That's when Cynthia saw it. A flicker in the corner of the room, a chill that brushed her arms. She forced herself not to run. I'll check in later," she whispered, backing out and pulling the door closed behind her. The night deepened. Snow battered the windows, and the wind moaned through the old hospital vents. Jack found himself talking to the dog, desperate for someone or something to hear him. "You here for Ellie?" he murmured. "Or for me?" The shepherd watched him, unblinking, then shifted, laying his head on Ellie's feet. Jack took that as an answer. He thought about his wife. Gone 3 years now. Cancer. He thought about all the nights he'd sat awake with Ellie in her room, reading her stories about heroes and guardians, about things that watched over you in the dark. He wondered if he'd ever believed in that kind of magic. Downstairs, Louise tried the cameras again. But now every feed from the second floor was static. He picked up his radio, voice trembling. "Still nothing on that dog. All feeds are glitching. What's going on up there?" No reply, just static. Back in 214, Ellie's breathing slowed. Jack wiped his eyes, exhausted. He almost missed it, the briefest flutter of her fingers, like a breeze rustling leaves. The shepherd sat up, alert, eyes locked on her face. The monitors pulsed steady. The room felt softer, as if someone had set a heavy stone down and finally let their shoulders drop. Jack stood, his legs aching, and reached for the emergency button. But he hesitated. The last thing he wanted was to scare the dog away, or to shatter the fragile peace. He sat back down, hands trembling. Outside, the snow drifted higher, erasing all sound. Somewhere deep in the hospital, an alarm beeped, faint, distant, quickly silenced. On the edge of sleep, Jack heard a nurse muttering as she passed the door. "That room drains people? Always has?" Jack wanted to shout back. Not tonight. Not anymore. The shepherd licked Ellie's toes, gentle, reverent. The room fell into a hush so complete it felt holy. He whispered, "Thank you." Voice cracking. The dog lifted his head, eyes meeting Jack's. For a split second, Jack thought he saw stars reflected there, tiny pinpricks of light, as if the whole night sky burned behind those black eyes. Later, they started calling the dog Orion. No one knew where the name came from. It just fit. The way he watched the world, silent, steady. The way he guarded the girl without a sound. Jack, lost and battered, finally slept with his head beside his daughter's hand, the shepherd curled at their feet. A silent promise echoing in the cold, fluorescent dark. Outside, the storm raged on. But in room 214, something had shifted. The darkness, for the first time in a long while, felt like it might just lose. Jack didn't know what time he fell asleep, only that when he woke, the harsh light of morning was trying and failing to break through the heavy hospital curtains. He blinked, momentarily unsure where he was, then remembered the rough vinyl of the hospital chair and the soft pressure of Ellie's small hand in his own. He sat up, back protesting, and immediately checked Ellie. She was still, breathing slow and deep, her face so peaceful it almost hurt to look at her. For a heartbeat, Jack let himself believe she'd just wake up, look at him, and ask for pancakes. Her old Saturday ritual. The monitors were steady, each green and red number glowing calmly. Then Jack looked down. The dog was still there. Curled tight against Ellie's feet, his head resting on her ankle. As if sensing Jack's gaze, the shepherd's ears flicked and he opened his eyes. That gaze, bottomless, ancient, met Jack's for a long moment. It was hard to tell if the animal was challenging him or reassuring him. Jack only knew that, for the first time since Ellie fell ill, he didn't feel quite so alone. Outside, footsteps and clipped voices moved down the corridor. Shift change. The night nurse, Cynthia, stepped inside, her eyes landing first on the dog, then on Jack, then on Ellie. She hesitated. "Still here?" she murmured, her tone a mixture of awe and something softer. Hope, maybe. The dog, I mean. Jack nodded. Did you see him come in? She shook her head. No one did. Security's rattled. The cameras went out for half an hour last night. She knelt tentatively near the dog, her hand hovering above his head. He's not like any animal I've ever seen around here. He's just calm. Too calm. Jack nodded, not sure what to say. The shepherd licked his lips and without a sound pressed closer to Ellie. Cynthia finally patted his head, flinching at first, but the dog only nuzzled her hand. For a split second, Cynthia laughed, soft and relieved. Guess he likes me. Jack watched, surprised by how grateful he felt. The room, for the first time, didn't feel like a prison cell. The heaviness, the old grief, the sense that something bad was just waiting in the shadows, had eased. It wasn't gone, but it had changed, softened, like frost melting in sunlight. Nurses came and went, drawn by curiosity and concern. Some tried to coax the dog out. One brought in a leash, but the shepherd didn't budge. When a nurse tried to take him by the collar, the dog didn't bark or snarl. He simply growled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floor. The message was clear. This was his post, and he was not leaving. Jack apologized. He's not mine, I swear. But after that, no one else tried. Instead, they started calling the dog Orion. The name floated through the ward, whispered from one nurse to another. Orion. The constellation. The hunter. The protector in the winter sky. It fit the dog, somehow. Jack found himself talking to Orion as if to a friend. When the room got too quiet, he whispered old memories to the dog. Stories of Ellie as a baby, stories of his wife's laugh, stories about hope and fear and all the things that lived in the silent places of the heart. Nights were still hardest. When the hospital lights dimmed and the quiet stretched long and thin, the cold would creep in again, making the corners of the room feel endless. Sometimes Jack thought he saw shadows that moved on their own, little flickers just beyond the reach of the lamp on the bedside table. At those times, Orion would stand, muscles taut, and stare into the darkness. He didn't growl, but he didn't relax either. Jack wondered quietly what Orion was seeing, what he was guarding against. One night, as a nurse came to check Ellie's chart, Orion's ears perked. He watched the nurse with sharp focus, not threatening but not trusting either. The nurse paused, smiled nervously, and backed away a little. Jack watched the dog, feeling a strange comfort bloom in his chest. He didn't have to say anything. Orion seemed to be doing the job no one else could. The following night, Jack drifted in and out of restless sleep. At some point, half dreaming, he felt a gentle pressure at his side. He opened his eyes to find Orion sitting upright, eyes fixed on Ellie. For a moment, Jack thought he heard a soft humming, almost like a lullaby, only it wasn't music. It was the whir of machines, the soft intake and exhale of the dog's breath, and the sense that something in the room was holding back a storm. Jack blinked, then watched as Ellie's eyelids fluttered. Just for a moment, her lips parted. She made a small sound, a sigh, or maybe a word too faint to catch. The monitor steadied further, every number landing in its perfect place. Orion inched closer, his nose nearly touching Ellie's foot. Jack's heart pounded. Ellie, he whispered. No answer, just that deep, peaceful breathing as if she was resting somewhere safe for the first time in a long while. He pressed his forehead to the mattress and for the first time wept, not from fear, but from hope. A fragile, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. Afterward, Jack straightened, wiping his eyes, and saw Orion staring at him. The dog's gaze was knowing, old, and impossibly kind. Jack reached out, hand shaking, and stroked Orion's fur. Thank you, Jack whispered again. Orion didn't react, just kept watching Ellie, alert and utterly present. Jack felt, for the first time, that the dog was guarding not just Ellie, but Jack himself. From grief, from despair, from the darkness that crept in when the world got too cold and too quiet. The next day, a new nurse, A young woman named Patrice brought a bowl of water and some leftover turkey from the break room. Orion sniffed the food, then looked up at Patrice, tail wagging once, a rare sign of approval. The staff began to warm to him. Some even joked that maybe the hospital should keep a comfort dog on call for all the lost souls who wandered its halls. But no one, not even Jack, ever saw anyone come to claim Orion. No lost dog posters, no phone calls, just a presence, quiet, steady, unyielding. That night, when Jack drifted to sleep, he dreamed he was lying beneath a sky full of stars. Orion at his side, Ellie laughing in the distance. For the first time since Ellie fell ill, the darkness felt less frightening. It felt watched over, protected. And as dawn broke, painting thin lines of gold across the snow, Jack awoke to a silence that wasn't empty, but whole. A silence filled with the steady presence of a guardian he never asked for, but desperately needed. Every night, as the hospital wound down and the echo of footsteps faded, room 214 seemed to slip into its own world. The rest of the ward was a quiet river, nurses on tiptoe, whispers by the supply closet, the hum of tired machinery. But behind the chipped blue door of 214, time didn't move the same way. It stretched and twisted, cold, gathering in the corners, settling over Jack and Ellie and Orion like a heavy blanket. Jack kept a journal now, a nervous habit, scribbling fragments of each hour. He noted when the lights flickered, how long the chill lasted, what words Ellie whispered in her sleep. He wrote down the times Orion sat up, muscles taut, every sense alive. Every night, without fail, 2:14 a.m. became the mark. The hour the world shivered, in room 214, exhaled something ancient. The nurses talked. Even the doctors who claimed not to believe in nonsense started scheduling rounds earlier or later, anything to avoid that hour. No one could explain why the light bulbs in 214 blew out twice as fast as anywhere else, or why the new digital thermometer always dropped 5 degrees as soon as the sun went down. Jack began to notice other things, too. Patterns in the frost that crept across the window, swirling into shapes that looked almost like letters or faces. He noticed how his breath fogged in the same corner every night, how Orion's gaze always landed on that exact spot when the cold hit. The dog would sit, rigid and silent, a low growl barely stirring the silence. His eyes didn't leave the darkness. The night nurse, Cynthia, once tried to joke, "We've got our own ghost, huh?" But no one laughed. In the long, restless quiet, belief was a subtle thing. It slipped in, gentle and terrible, when science ran out of answers. One night, after Cynthia finished checking the IV and left, Jack watched Orion as the clock ticked toward 2:14. The air grew sharp, the lights blinked, then dimmed. Jack shivered, wrapping his arms around himself. He tried humming one of Ellie's favorite lullabies, his voice unsteady, lost in the cold. Then Ellie stirred. At first, it was a twitch. Her fingers flexed, her lips parted, her lashes fluttered. Jack froze, barely breathing. Orion moved closer, pressing his nose to her foot. Ears locked on the shadowy corner, Ellie's lips moved, almost soundless. Jack leaned in, desperate to catch any word. Her voice was a ghost of itself. Faint breath. Eveline. The name hung in the room, heavy as a bell. Jack's mind spun. Eveline. He'd never heard Ellie use that name. Was it from a story? A cartoon? An old neighbor? He searched his memory and came up empty. He waited until morning, when the sun was just a pink line behind the storm, and called Cynthia back in. "Does Eveline mean anything to you?" he asked, voice thick from another sleepless night. Cynthia blinked. "We haven't had any Evelines on staff. Not since I started. Decades back, maybe. But that's an old name." She checked her phone, scrolling through staff records. Nothing," Jack asked the other nurses. No Eveline in their memories either. No former patients. The hospital directory held nothing but a list of names that might as well have been etched in snow. Still, every night, as the frost crept up the glass and the lights flickered, Ellie whispered, "Eveline," in her sleep. Sometimes her words tumbled out, fragmented, drifting through time. Go rest now. The parlor's cold. Hymn book, please. Jack began to feel a presence in that cold corner. He'd look up from his notebook, feel the hair rise on his arms, and see Orion's. Hackles lift, eyes narrowing, ears pointed at the dark as if something waited just out of sight. One night, desperate, Jack called his sister Marlene, who'd always believed in things he couldn't see. He whispered the story about the shepherd, the name, the way. Room 214 seemed to hold its breath. Marlene listened, quiet and attentive. When Jack finished, she asked, "What does Ellie say when she's dreaming?" Jack repeated the phrases. Marlene hummed softly. "Sounds like she's not alone. In there?" she said. "Sometimes names linger when souls get lost. Eveline might be someone we didn't get to finish her story." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "You think this is... what? A haunting?" Marlene hesitated, then said, "I think... sometimes places remember pain, sometimes kindness, too. If Ellie's speaking that name, maybe it means something's reaching out or someone's reaching back." After the call, Jack couldn't sleep. He watched Orion pace, back and forth, as if guarding the line between worlds. He watched the frost on the window, now swirling into something almost like a flower or a star. Every part of him ached for answers. The next morning, Patrice brought coffee and sat with Jack for a while. "You look terrible," she joked, but gently. "She said the name again last night," Jack told her. Patrice grew quiet. "Maybe you should ask someone in records. The hospital's been here a long time. Maybe Eveline's story isn't finished yet." Jack nodded, feeling the seed of a new resolve. That night, as 2:14 approached, Jack wrapped Ellie's small hand in both of his and waited. The room chilled, frost blooming across the glass. Orion growled, louder this time, and Jack shivered. In the silence, Ellie's lips parted. "Eveline, go rest now." The lights flickered out completely. The silence was so deep, it throbbed in Jack's chest. For a moment, he thought he saw a shape, thin and dark, moving in the corner, like a shadow that had learned to walk. Orion stood, growling, body tense. Jack closed his eyes. "Whoever you are, please, let my daughter go." A warmth flickered behind his lids, brief as a heartbeat. The lights buzzed, then steadied. Ellie slipped back into quiet sleep, the cold easing from the air. Jack opened his eyes and saw Orion staring at him, as if asking for trust. Outside, the snow fell heavy and relentless, burying the world in white. Inside, Jack held onto Ellie's hand and whispered, "We're not alone, sweetheart. We're not alone." And as the clock turned, he dared to hope that even the oldest shadows could be given a name, and that names sometimes could lead the lost back home. Jack had learned to measure nights by the rhythm of the hospital. The click of wheels on linoleum, the whisper of nurses swapping shifts, the brief flicker of hope each time a doctor poked his head into room 214. But nothing in the rhythm felt right anymore. Each hour now seemed to build toward something sharp and unspoken, a mounting pressure like the weight of snow on an old roof. He barely slept. He kept a silent vigil, tracing the seconds as they passed on the flickering wall clock. Orion, ever faithful, slept in bursts, one ear cocked, always listening. Ellie was quieter than ever, but her lips moved in dreams, always around that same name. Eveline, Eveline. The staff grew jittery. Patrice left a thermos of coffee at the door every evening, but didn't step inside. Cynthia brought extra blankets for Jack, then hesitated in the doorway, eyes darting from Orion to the coldest corner of the room. "If anything changes, just call," she said, her voice barely steady. Anything at all. But nothing prepared them for the fifth night. It started with a storm, a wild, punishing blizzard outside. The hospital's ancient windows rattled, wind carving thin shrieks down the glass. At midnight, the lights browned out across the building. Emergency generators hummed. The whole place felt haunted by its own electric pulse. Jack wrapped Ellie tighter in her quilt, trying to keep the cold off her thin arms. He watched the monitors, every beep feeling like a countdown. Orion stood, tail low, staring hard at the corner where the shadows always seemed thickest. Jack felt it before he saw it, the way the air grew heavier, the way the silence deepened. He shivered, skin crawling. Something was different, more present, more insistent. His hands shook as he reached for Ellie's, willing her to squeeze back. A sharp alarm shattered the quiet. Ellie's oxygen dropped in a sudden, terrifying lurch. The monitor wailed. Jack slammed the call button, shouting for help, but in that instant the overhead lights stuttered out entirely. The room plunged into a cold, inky dark, lit only by the spectral blue glow of the emergency monitor. He saw it then, a shape coalescing in the corner, thicker than shadow, slower than fog. It pulsed and twisted, blacker than the night itself. The air around it shimmered, turning each exhale into vapor. The temperature dropped so quickly Jack's teeth ached. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Ellie seized, her whole body arching, her small face screwed tight with pain, lips turning blue. Jack sobbed, raw, broken. "Help! Please! Someone! Help her!" The shape in the corner grew, stretching up the wall and across the ceiling, blotting out the faint shine of the monitors. It pressed down on Jack's chest, thick and suffocating, smothering hope. And then Orion moved. The dog didn't hesitate, didn't look for permission. He leapt from the foot of the bed, landing between Ellie and the dark shape. His hackles rose, lips peeled back, not in mindless rage, but in fierce, focused purpose. The sound that tore from Orion's throat was nothing like a bark. It was primal, rumbling, something that belonged to the deep earth and ancient nights. Jack would swear later that the dog grew larger, shoulders hunched against the darkness, teeth gleaming. The shadow seemed to recoil, swirling and shrieking, a terrible, voiceless wind. Orion lunged, snapping his jaws at empty air, chasing the thing back toward the corner. Each bark shook the air, each snarl split the silence. The room shook, glass rattling in the window frames. Ellie gasped, a small, strangled sound, then slumped. Her chest heaved, oxygen numbers ticking upward again. Jack sobbed, half collapsed across the mattress. For a moment it felt like war, a battle played out with no witnesses, no weapons but faith and desperation. Jack saw through his tears Orion's body arching, paws scraping against the linoleum, pushing the darkness back, until, in a shudder of cold, it vanished. The air snapped warm, the lights flickered, humming to life, monitors steadied. And then it was over. Orion paced the room, nose low, muscles tense, as if searching for any last trace of the thing that had tried to claim the girl. He sniffed Ellie's hand, then lay back down. Chest heaving with effort, the rest of the world came back in a rush. Nurses burst into the room, faces blanched, hands trembling. "What happened?" Cynthia shouted, rushing to Ellie's side, checking her vitals. "We lost power. Everything glitched." Her voice broke off as she saw Jack's wild eyes, Orion's bristling fur. "Something was here," Jack rasped, voice hollow. It was real." The staff exchanged looks, fear, disbelief, the grim solidarity of those who've seen too much and cannot explain any of it. But Ellie's numbers were steady. Her skin was pink again, her breath, finally, evened out. One of the aides, a sturdy man named Don, tried to usher Orion out, muttering about health codes. Orion stared him down, unblinking, and Don retreated, muttering curses under his breath. When the room settled, Jack knelt beside Orion, gathering the dog's great head in his hands. "Thank you," he whispered, voice ragged. He looked up at Ellie, her face as peaceful as he'd ever seen it. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He watched Orion, saw how the dog never let his eyes leave the darkest corner of the room, even after the threat was gone. The air was lighter now, as if the worst of the storm had passed. Still, Jack felt changed. Something inside him cracked open, humbled by what he'd witnessed. He didn't understand any of it, not really. But he believed now. He believed in guardians. He believed that sometimes the darkness had shape and hunger, and sometimes, just when hope seemed lost, something brave and loyal would step between you and the abyss. By morning, The blizzard outside had begun to break. The first blue slice of sky crept above the horizon. Ellie's fingers twitched in her sleep, her lips forming a name Jack still didn't know, but now longed to understand. He reached for his journal, hands steadier than they'd been in weeks, and wrote down the night as best he could. Then he closed his eyes, listening to the gentle breathing of his daughter and the dog, and let gratitude fill the cracks left by fear. Some battles, he realized, could only be fought in the quiet hours, when no one else was watching, and some victories, however small, were enough to let the dawn in. Morning crept slow and uncertain through the windows of room 214, laying pale stripes across the tangled blankets. The air was different now, less brittle, less haunted. Jack found himself drifting in that liminal space between relief and exhaustion, replaying the battle of the night before in his mind, questioning the reality of what he'd witnessed. Orion lay sprawled at Ellie's feet, head tucked over her ankle, breathing slow and even. The shepherd was spent, but not broken. In the harsh light of day, his presence radiated quiet strength. Ellie had slept through the chaos, but something subtle had changed in her. Her cheeks were less hollow, her fingers less stiff. The color had returned, faint but visible, to her lips. When the doctors rounded, they mumbled about remarkable stability, as if wary of jinxing the fragile peace. After the staff left, Jack pressed a soft kiss to Ellie's forehead and let himself relax for the first time in days. The ward was unusually calm. Even the usual alarms and distant calls seemed hushed. Cynthia entered with a bundle of old patient files under her arm. She looked tired, but there was a sparkle in her eyes, a subtle recognition that something extraordinary was happening in this place. Whether or not she could say it aloud, she sat on the edge of the bed. Jack, I found something strange in storage this morning. Old stuff, before digital records, back when everything was paper and rumor. She passed him a worn envelope, brittle and yellowed at the edges, stamped with the hospital's crest. Figured you'd want to see it. Jack hesitated, thumb tracing the seam of the envelope. He slid out its contents, a photograph, black and white, edges curled with age. The image showed a hospital room almost identical to 214, though the wallpaper was faded, the bed narrower. In the bed was a girl, pale as porcelain, hair spilling over the pillow, and at her feet, a dog, a German shepherd, black and white, posture noble and alert. The resemblance was uncanny. Jack's skin prickled. He flipped the photo. On the back, written in neat cursive, Eveline. He kept the darkness from taking her. He stayed. Until she let go. Jack's heart hammered. Eveline. The name Ellie whispered each night. The name that lingered in every shadow of this room. Cynthia leaned in, reading over his shoulder. I asked around. No one remembers Eveline, but the hospital's older than most of us. Sometimes the past leaks through. Jack nodded, words caught in his throat. He looked at Orion. The dog stared back, eyes deep as lakes in winter. Jack pressed the photo gently to Ellie's hand, unsure why. Is this what you've been dreaming, sweetheart? He whispered. Later that day, Jack wandered the hallways, needing air, needing answers. The snow had stopped, and sunlight spilled in thin blades across the floor. At the end of the corridor, an old display case held scraps of the hospital's history. News clippings, brass nameplates, the odd photo of long-retired staff. He found a tiny brass plaque. Room 214, original pediatric ward, estimated 1949. He asked at the nurse's desk if anyone knew more. Patrice, the young nurse, said her grandmother once worked here in the 50s. She always said this wing was special. Some kids just lingered, even after they left. Jack went back to the room and reread the back of the photo. He kept the darkness from taking her. He stayed until she let go. He wondered who wrote it. Was it a nurse? A parent, just like him, watching and waiting for a miracle. That night, Jack placed the old photo beside Ellie's pillow. Orion sniffed it, then lay down with his chin on his paws, his body pressing close to the girl's legs, as if sealing her away from whatever might slip through the cracks. The hospital settled into its familiar hush. Jack dozed with his head on his arms, one hand resting atop Ellie's. At some point in the small hours, he woke to the clicks of claws on tile. He lifted his head. Orion was standing, staring at the far corner again, the place where frost always bloomed. Jack followed the shepherd's gaze. The cold was back, a ripple in the air. Orion's tail stiffened, ears sharp. Jack saw it then, something different about the shadows, a pattern on the wall, swirling, shifting. He moved closer, holding his breath. Ellie murmured in her sleep, "Go rest now." "It's okay, Eveline." The shadow on the wall pulsed, then thinned, stretching into the vague outline of a small girl. For a heartbeat, Jack could almost see her. A pale face, hair tangled, eyes wide with longing. The shepherd stepped forward, placing himself between the bed and the shadow, body rigid with purpose. Jack's heart broke open with understanding. Eveline wasn't here to harm them. She was trapped, a lost story, a lingering memory, unable to let go. The shepherd, Orion, had been here before, across decades, holding vigil for those at the edge. He whispered, "You can rest now, Eveline. It's safe. He's still here." The shadow faded, slow and soft. The cold eased. Ellie stirred, fingers curling around the photo. "Thank you," she breathed. Her voice barely a whisper, and for a moment Jack thought he heard another voice layered beneath hers, distant and grateful. The rest of the night passed in a hush so deep it was almost holy. Jack sat awake, one hand on Ellie's head, the other on Orion's broad shoulders. The first glow of dawn spilled across the windows, not quite touching the frost, but promising warmth. In the early morning, Ellie shifted and turned toward her father, her sleep lighter, her breath more certain. Jack leaned down, voice choked. "I saw her, Ellie. I think she's gone now. I think he helped her find her way." Orion, eyes heavy but still shining, lifted his head and nuzzled Jack's hand. As the world outside the hospital moved on, room 214 held a peace that felt earned, not given. The past had let go, and the present, for the first time, felt possible again. And though Jack knew there were still battles ahead, he also knew the worst shadows sometimes only needed kindness, and a loyal guardian who refused to leave. Even as the years turned and new stories began. After the night the shadow faded, something subtle shifted inside room 214. For the first time in weeks, Jack let himself imagine a life outside these four walls. Ellie's cheeks had color now, and when she slept, her breath no longer rattled in her chest. Each morning brought a little more strength to her limbs and less weight to Jack's heart. Even the nurses seemed to sense it. The way the air felt lighter, the way hope crept in with the sunlight. Still, the mystery of Eveline lingered, an invisible thread stitched through every hour. Jack kept the old photograph close, tucking it beside Ellie's pillow. Every so often he caught her small hand curled around it in her sleep. It was in these days of cautious optimism that the dreams began to change. At first it was just a word here or there, Ellie murmuring, "Eveline," or "Go rest now," in her sleep. But soon she began to speak in phrases that didn't fit, not for a modern 7-year-old. "Bring the hymn book," she'd whisper, or "parlor coat," or, most hauntingly, "Tell it to sleep. It listens to kindness." Jack started recording her at night, more for his own sanity than anything else. The voice that spilled from Ellie in her sleep sounded like her, but at times softer, carrying an odd, old rhythm. When he played the recordings for Cynthia and Patrice, the nurses exchanged wary glances. "I don't like it," Cynthia admitted one morning, eyes darting to the photograph. "That's old language. I used to hear stories like that from my grandmother. Not a child's. Words." Patrice, who had always been a little more open to mystery, leaned in and listened again. Maybe she's remembering things. Or maybe she's remembering for someone else. Jack watched Ellie closely each night, heart torn between hope and unease. Orion watched too, The shepherd's ears always perked when Ellie spoke in her sleep, as if he understood every word. Sometimes the dog would get up, pacing the length of the bed, a soft whine deep in his chest. One afternoon, Jack wandered into the hospital's small library, a forgotten alcove near the old chapel. He asked the librarian about Eveline, about old journals, about anything left behind from the hospital's early years. The woman, white-haired and brisk, disappeared for a while, returning with a battered notebook tied with string. "It's from a nurse named Agnes," she said. "1950s. Not much in it, but maybe you'll find something." Jack took the notebook back to room 214, heart thumping. He spent the evening poring over Agnes's looping handwriting, each page a window into a vanished era. Entries about lost children, harsh winters, hope and heartbreak pressed between the lines. Then, near the back, he found what he was looking for. Eveline, restless tonight. Whispered in her fever. Tell it to sleep. It listens to kindness. Said it over and over. The shepherd stays at her side. I pray she finds peace. Jack shivered, running his thumb over the faded ink. The words matched exactly what Ellie murmured in her sleep. He didn't know what to make of it, only that the line between past and present had thinned, that some things refused to be forgotten. That night, as the wind rose and the hospital settled into its slow, mechanical breathing, Jack sat beside his daughter and read Agnes's journal aloud. He hoped that by speaking Eveline's words, some of the weight would lift. He spoke softly, telling the story of a lost girl and her loyal dog, of kindness that survived the coldest nights. Ellie's breathing grew steady as he read. Orion, curled beside her, seemed to relax, his muscles easing. Jack thought, for a fleeting moment, that he saw Ellie smile in her sleep. Then days passed. Ellie's strength returned in small increments. Her hands gripping Jack's, her eyelids fluttering open for moments at a time. She didn't wake fully, not yet, but the doctors were hopeful, their voices brighter. Jack kept reading each night. Sometimes he'd add his own stories, memories of Ellie as a toddler, or tales of Orion's silent heroism. It became a ritual. The photo, the journal, the stories. The darkness in the corners seemed less bold, the cold less biting. And still, Ellie whispered, "Tell it to sleep. It listens to kindness." The phrase wound its way into Jack's thoughts, filling the empty spaces left by grief. One evening, while Jack recited from the journal, Ellie's hand tightened around his. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips moving. It's so tired," she whispered. "It wants to rest. It's lonely." Jack leaned close, voice trembling. "What's lonely, sweetheart?" Ellie's face softened. "The cold thing, the shadow. It doesn't want to be bad. It just forgot how to be gentle." A shudder ran through Jack. He understood then. The thing that haunted room 214 wasn't evil, just lost. It was pain and fear, old as the building itself, desperate for rest. Orion stood, head bowed, and pressed his nose to Ellie's hand. A hush fell over the room. Jack spoke gently, words he didn't know he remembered. "Rest now. You're not alone anymore. Thank you for watching over us. Thank you for being kind." For the first time, the air felt completely clear. The cold receded, replaced by something warm, something like peace. Ellie sighed, her hands still clasped around Jack's. Orion settled beside her, breathing easy. The clock ticked past 2:14 a.m., and nothing flickered, nothing chilled. Jack leaned back in his chair, hope swelling. The past, with all its hurt and longing, was finally being laid to rest. That night, Jack dreamed of a field bathed in golden light, where a girl and a dog ran together, laughing and free. When he woke, the dawn was already breaking over the snow, and for the first time in so long, he believed the world could be gentle again. The weather turned savage again, as if the world itself resisted letting go. By evening, the sky over upstate New York glowed a bruised purple. Heavy snow battered the windows, muting the hum of the hospital. Emergency lights flickered in the corridors, their glow unsteady as the staff hurried through shadowed halls, Radios crackling with warnings of an incoming blizzard. Jack felt a restless pressure in his chest all day. He watched Ellie's face, still but alive, with faint hints of color blooming in her cheeks. Orion had not left her side, even to eat. He watched the shepherd's eyes tracking every shift in the wind, every strange noise down the hallway. The dog's body was rigid, always braced for something that Jack couldn't see but could almost sense. As the night deepened, the storm outside grew fierce. Power lines shuddered under the weight of ice. Just after midnight, the overhead lights in room 214 shivered and died, replaced by the low hum of backup generators. The world outside disappeared behind a curtain of swirling snow. A nurse stopped by to check the equipment. "Blizzards knocked out half the grid," she said, voice nervous, "but the generators should hold." She paused at the sight of Orion, then nodded and closed the door, gently, behind her. Jack sat in the shadowed room, his face lit by the monitor's glow, listening to the wind. He glanced at the photo of Eveline and her shepherd on the side table, then at Ellie, then at the dog, whose breath steamed faintly in the cold air. As 2:14 a.m. crept closer, the temperature dropped sharply. The silence deepened. No footsteps, no voices, just the howling storm and the soft, steady whir of the machines. Then, all at once, the power faltered. The monitors blinked out. The darkness became absolute. Jack's heart hammered. He reached for Ellie, grasping her hand. Orion stood abruptly, ears flat, body coiled. In the dark, Jack heard it. A low, slow rumble, not from the dog, but from the air itself, as if the room itself was growling. A cold presence pooled in the far corner. Jack could feel it before he saw it, a force pressing on his chest, suffocating, ancient, and full of grief. He strained his eyes. The darkness there was thicker, more viscous, swirling with shapes that made no sense. A face, a hand, a yawning mouth. The air vibrated. The light bulbs burst one by one, tiny pops like knuckles cracking. Jack could not move. He gripped Ellie's hand, desperate, terrified. "Not again," he whispered. "Not tonight." Ellie stirred. Her lips moved, her eyelids fluttering. Orion barked, loud and sharp, a thunderclap in the silence. The darkness recoiled, twisting and pulsing like a living wound. The door banged open as wind rushed down the hallway, slamming into the room with a gust of snow. Jack felt cold fingers at his back, as if something tried to wrench him away. He clung to Ellie, pulling her close, shielding her body with his own. The monitors flared to life for a brief second, casting green shadows across the walls. Ellie gasped, and her voice was clear, brighter than before, slicing through the chaos. "It's time to sleep now." The shadow shape surged, stretching toward the bed. Orion lunged, barking again, a sound deeper, stranger than anything Jack had ever heard, more like the roar of the sea than any dog's voice. The walls seemed to shake. Jack felt the pressure break, the cold wind recede. For an instant, the shadow hovered, torn and howling. Then, Ellie whispered, with a calm that didn't belong to a 7-year-old. "It listens to kindness. Tell it to sleep." Orion stood between her and the darkness, barking, snapping, holding the line. The room warmed as if a fire had sprung up, chasing back the chill. Jack heard a distant voice, Eveline's voice, soft and grateful. "Thank you." The darkness split, uncoiled, and then, just as suddenly, vanished. A warm breeze swept the room, carrying the sharp scent of snow and something else, lilacs, summer grass, a memory of laughter. The silence that followed was total. No more flickering, no more shadows. Jack collapsed, sobbing into Ellie's shoulder, heart raw. He felt Orion's fur beneath his hand, warm and solid. He heard Ellie sigh, the tension draining from her small body, her breath even and peaceful. Gradually, the world returned. The generator stuttered back to life. The lights blinked on, weak but steady. Jack looked up to see Ellie's eyes open, clear, alert, full of life. She smiled at him, the first real smile in weeks. "Daddy," she whispered. Jack could only nod, tears streaming down his face. "I'm here. I'm here." He pulled her close. For the first time since this nightmare began, he didn't feel afraid. He looked over at Orion, who sat watchful and calm, eyes bright in the half-light. The storm outside began to fade, the wind losing its fury. Nurses rushed in, breathless, eyes wide. The whole building just stopped, Patrice gasped, hand to her heart. "Are you all right?" Jack nodded, unable to speak. He gestured to Ellie, to the monitors that showed healthy, normal numbers for the first time. The staff stared in disbelief, then in wonder. Ellie sat up on her own, voice growing stronger with every word. "It's all gone now. The cold thing. Eveline, she's resting. Orion helped her. We're safe." Patrice looked from Ellie to Orion, then to Jack, and smiled through her tears. "It's over," she whispered. Jack sat back in the chair, holding his daughter's hand, Orion resting his head on Jack's knee. The room felt ordinary. No shadows, no cold, just peace. Outside, the snow began to fall softly, gentle as sleep. The storm had passed. For the first time in room 214, there was nothing left to fear, only the warmth of a story finished, and the hush that comes when old pain finally lets go. By dawn, the hospital's storm shutters rattled with the final sighs of the blizzard. The world outside room 214 was softened by a fresh, clean blanket of snow. No tracks, no footprints, just white stretching toward the blue horizon. Sunlight, hesitant at first, crept over the windowsill and landed on Ellie's bed, turning the thin hospital blanket to gold. Jack woke slowly, uncertain if the night's events had been a fever dream. For a moment, all he heard was the soft, steady beep of the monitors, a gentle reassurance after weeks of fear. Then he realized something even stranger. The tension was gone. The room, for the first time, felt like any other room. Warm, ordinary, safe. Ellie sat up still in her little hospital gown, hair tangled, eyes clear and bright. She looked at Jack and giggled, a sound so pure and delighted that Jack's heart clenched with joy and disbelief. "Daddy, I want pancakes," she declared, voice light and sure, as if nothing bad had ever happened at all. Jack laughed, a rough, cracked sound, and wiped his eyes. He stroked her hair, feeling the miracle of her warmth, her presence, the impossible return of her laughter. He turned to thank Orion, to pull the big shepherd into his arms and whisper his gratitude, but the dog was gone. At first, Jack thought Orion was simply out of sight, curled up under the bed, or nosing through the hallway for scraps. But a quick search proved fruitless. The room was empty. The bed, the space beneath the chair, the quiet stretch by the window, all silent, undisturbed. There was no bark, no click of nails on tile, just the hollow quiet where the dog had lain for days and nights on end. Jack checked the hallway, peered into the nurse's station, asked Cynthia and Patrice if they'd seen the shepherd slip by. No one had. "Maybe he's with the maintenance crew," Cynthia guessed, but her eyes were soft, knowing. Patrice simply squeezed Jack's arm and whispered, "Sometimes, when a job's done, a guardian just moves on." Jack walked back to room 214, feeling the echo of loss and gratitude mingle in his chest. He sat by Ellie's bed, letting the warmth and ordinariness of the morning wash over him. Later that day, while Ellie napped and the doctors checked her vitals in amazement, Jack found himself drawn to the small tray table beside the window. There, where the old photo of Eveline had rested, something new caught his eye. The photograph was there, but the image seemed clearer now, less faded, the lines sharper, the shepherd's eyes almost shining. Jack turned the photo over and found a new message written in careful, looping script. "He finds those who need him most." He ran his thumb over the words, eyes prickling with tears. The truth settled inside him, heavy and gentle as a snowfall. Orion had never belonged to him, or even to this place. The dog, if he had ever been just a dog, was a watcher, a companion for the lost, an answer to the kind of prayers people spoke only in the darkest hours. For the rest of the day, Jack watched Ellie, her cheeks flushed, her hair a tangle of life. She ate breakfast and lunch, giggling over the taste of syrup. She played with her dolls, even drew a picture for the nurses. A little girl in a hospital bed, a dog at her feet, a patch of sunlight pouring in. The staff took turns visiting, each marveling at her recovery, each sneaking long, searching glances at the old photograph on her tray. That afternoon, hospital administration arrived to speak with Jack. Curious, skeptical, desperate for answers that didn't exist. He tried to explain, but what could he say? That his daughter had been healed by a dog no one else could find. That a girl from 1952 had whispered through decades to help Ellie find her way back. The story was too strange, too gentle, too much like hope. In the end, Jack just smiled and thanked them, holding the photo close. As the sun set, painting the snow in colors of fire and rose, Jack and Ellie prepared to leave. The nurses brought a wheelchair, but Ellie insisted on walking, wobbly but determined. She paused in the doorway of room 214, looking back only once. "Goodbye," she said, soft and solemn. "Thank you." Jack bent to scoop her up, unable to resist a final embrace. He felt, just for a heartbeat, a warm breath at his ear, a presence, unseen but not unfelt. He looked back, but there was nothing, just the quiet hush of a room at peace. Before they left, Cynthia pressed the photograph back into Jack's hands. "Keep it safe," she whispered. "Some stories don't end. They just wait for someone to remember." Jack tucked the photo into Ellie's bag. Together, they stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the ghosts and the shadows, the cold and the fear. As they walked through the hospital's main doors, the wind had gentled, the storm a memory. The world was clean and bright, and Jack's heart, battered but whole, beat in time with Ellie's laughter. Back upstairs, the night nurse paused by room 214, straightening the blankets, closing the blinds. She paused, hand on the door, listening to the silence. For a moment, she thought she heard the faintest jingle of a collar, the soft huff of a sleeping dog. She smiled and let the door close behind her. In the end, there was no applause, no bright revelation, only a room grown quiet and ordinary, and a family piecing itself back together, moment by miraculous moment. The world outside County Memorial Hospital had changed while Jack and Ellie were tucked away in room 214, weathering storms of snow and sorrow and things much harder to name. The sun was bright and sharp on their faces as they left, the air filled with the scent of thawing earth and distant wood smoke. It was the first time in weeks that Jack felt the season turning toward spring, not just outside but inside himself too. At home, everything looked both smaller and impossibly precious. The cluttered kitchen, the dog-eared books on the table, the faded photographs taped to the fridge. Jack let Ellie choose her room. She went straight to the little window seat where she used to curl up with a storybook and a mug of cocoa, legs tucked beneath her, wild hair falling in her eyes. He watched her take out the old black and white photograph, the one with the pale girl and the watchful shepherd. She placed it on her nightstand, right next to her favorite lamp. That first night back, Jack checked on her every hour, unable to break the habit of fear. But Ellie slept so deeply, so easily, he almost cried each time he opened her door. No nightmares, no fever, no restless whispers in the dark. The house itself seemed to breathe easier, as if the long shadow of worry had finally faded. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the windows. Ellie woke with a yawn and called for pancakes, her voice light as birdsong. Jack made breakfast, burning the first batch from nerves and excitement. They ate together, syrup and sticky laughter filling the kitchen. For the first time in a long while, Jack believed in the simple goodness of an ordinary day. Later, as Ellie played on the floor with her stuffed animals, Jack picked up the photograph. He turned it over, tracing the message on the back. He finds those who need him most. He thought of Orion, the way the dog had appeared out of nowhere, the way he had stood guard, silent and fierce until the danger passed. He wondered how many other stories there might be, How many rooms had been protected by an unseen friend? Jack knelt beside Ellie, watching her line up her animals in a neat parade. Do you remember much about the hospital? He asked gently. Ellie nodded, thoughtful. I remember you being there in the snow, and the dog. He made me feel safe. Even when it was really cold, I wasn't scared. He told me it was okay to rest. Jack's throat tightened. Do you think he'll visit us again? Ellie shook her head, smiling softly. He only comes when someone needs him. Maybe now he's, helping someone else. That night, before bed, Ellie tucked the old photo under her pillow. Jack watched her drift off, breath even, brow smooth. He sat in the doorway, long after, listening to the quiet, thinking about all the things he'd never be able to explain. As the weeks passed, Jack found himself drawn to small acts of kindness. He helped a neighbor shovel the walk. He brought groceries to an old friend. He found himself pausing, really seeing people in ways he hadn't before. He knew it wasn't magic, wasn't some ghostly dog moving his hands, but it was as if Orion had left a kind of light behind, a quiet nudge toward goodness. Ellie grew stronger every day. The doctors called her recovery unprecedented, their faces still shadowed by disbelief. But Jack didn't try to make sense of it anymore. Some stories weren't meant to be explained. They were meant to be lived and then remembered. One afternoon, Jack found Ellie sitting at the window, gazing into the backyard. What are you looking for? He asked. She shrugged. Just listening. Sometimes I think I can hear him out there, like a dog running through the snow, or a bark really far away. She turned to him, eyes bright. Makes me feel happy, Daddy, like I'm never really alone. Jack hugged her close, burying his face in her hair. He whispered, Me too, kiddo. Me too. That night, as Jack turned out the lights, he paused at Ellie's door and whispered, Thank you, whoever you are, wherever you are. In the hush that followed, the house felt full, not just of memories, but of something gentle and unseen, something that made even the darkest places feel safe. If you listened close, you could almost hear it. The faint jingle of a collar, the slow, steady breath of a guardian who had simply moved on. Some protectors don't need to be seen to be real. Some don't need names to be remembered. They just show up when we're most lost and leave when we're finally found. And sometimes, when the world is quiet and your heart is open, you might hear a bark in the distance or feel a warmth settle beside you. It's a reminder that not all angels walk on two legs. Sometimes the ones who save us do so in silence and shadows, with nothing but loyalty and love. If you believe in unseen guardians, or if the story touched your heart, and please like, comment, and share. Every story helps keep the light burning for someone who needs it most. And who knows, maybe your kindness will bring a little more light to someone's darkest night.